Good morning, Damascus. Happy Sabbath. Thank you to the praise team for that song. And thank you, Lennox, for reading those verses. You know, as I thought about what Sister Yvette was saying about faith, it occurred to me that delivering a sermon is like stepping out on faith. Delivering a sermon is like walking out on the water on faith. So I'm depending on all of you to keep my faith up, and so I don't sink. Okay? So today's sermon is entitled, Returning Good for Evil. And I wonder how many of you have had the occasion to, I know no one's returned evil for good, not in here, but how many of you had the occasion that you tried to do good and evil was returned to you? Now, I don't mean I had good intentions. I mean, you actually did good, but what you got in return was evil. I bet that's probably happened to all of us, one time or another. I know it's happened to me, but the time that I remember the most when that happened was about 12 years ago. 12 years ago, the start of the 2009 recession, roughly 12 years ago. I had my own business, had my own business for quite some time. But when the recession came, I found that I had to go work for somebody else. So I applied for a job, very nice job, well-paying job. And I got a telephone call. That was my interview, and I was hired, and I went to work. Well, unknown to me, one of the people in the interview, a lady named Cheryl, was going to be my boss. And she sounded such a nice person during the telephone conversation. But when I went to work, the first few days was orientation. So we were out in the auditorium, we were being told about our job. And about halfway through orientation, one of the women who worked for Cheryl came. She was really upset. She's really nervous. She said, you know, Cheryl is unhappy with you. What did I do? She said, you didn't come and introduce yourself to her before you went to orientation. Well, I didn't know what to say. I was like, I didn't know I was supposed to. But I went on with the orientation. I let it go. And the second day we had orientation. And then after that, I went and reported to Cheryl. She didn't want to talk to me. She looked at me as if you ever had somebody look at you as if you have two left feet and you feel like, what's wrong with me? She was going to be my supervisor. But Cheryl, the whole time, she never told me what my job was, what I was to do. She never had any conversation at all with me. And I was stuck trying to ask other people, well, you know, what did the last person who had this job do? This went on for for months. And it got progressively worse. Imagine you're doing a job, but you don't know what it is. And the supervisor won't tell you. But if you do something wrong, oh, you'll know about that. So this went on for months. And I was talking to my wife about it. I didn't know what to do. There was a point where I said, I'm going to get even with her. She's mistreating me. I'm going to go to the union. And I'm going to have the union, on her. But my wife convinced me that that probably wasn't the right thing to do. She convinced me that, everybody has something going on in their life, and maybe Cheryl has something going on in her life that none of her employees know about. I prayed on it, and for some reason, the answer I got was to go buy a chocolate cake. Now, this wasn't just any chocolate cake. I don't know, if you guys have ever shopped at Costco, they make this giant chocolate cake, double chocolate. It's huge. And that was the impression I got. Go buy that cake and take it to work. Because some of the people in that section, they did that every now and then. So I got the cake. I took it in. They set it out. It was kind of like on the side of my cubicle. And boy, the people in that whole area, they were so pleased. Even Cheryl's boss, I saw him like 2 times. He's coming, slicing a piece and disappearing. He came back to get another piece. Everybody was complimenting Cheryl on the fact that her section had bought in that cake. And you know what? What do you think happened in the relationship between Cheryl and me? You think it got better? Think it completely improved? Body say no. It did. It got better. It improved. And I don't know why, but that one act of returning good for something that she had been doing to me seemed to work. Now, I did pray, so it's probably that combined with the prayer. But it does help. And Jesus said that we should all return good for even those who hate us, for those who spite us, for those who shamefully use us. We should always love them. As a matter of fact, Jesus said, it will heap coals on their head. The first few times I didn't understand that. And probably most people won't understand that either until you actually do something like that to somebody who is really treating you badly. And then they expect you to come back with evil, and you come back with good. If you've not done it, try it. And you'll understand what Jesus said when he said it will heap coals on their head. So let's get into my lesson. But before I do, I want to thank Lennox for starting it off for me. So we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 25. And I want to thank Leonard for starting that off for us, for those of you who've probably forgotten. So, for verse 1, let's just have an overview. So, Samuel, the prophet, has died. Samuel was the last of the judges. He was the last one. He was a prophet, but he was also a judge. Interestingly enough, he's not always mentioned in the list of judges, but he was also a judge. And he had died, and he brought Israel to an end of an era, of the judge era. But so widespread was Samuel's influence among people that all of Israel gathered to lament his death. And as Lennox said, the wilderness of Paran. So let's place David in this situation and then talk about the wilderness of Paran. David, who we know from the prior chapter, had hid in a cave. Saul had come by, and David had, surprised him, and he could have killed him. But he told him later on, hey, I saw you, I didn't kill you. And Saul says, oh, that's great. I see that you really do love me. And I guess he was like, let's go back to the palace, David. But David didn't do that. David decided to go to his stronghold in the wilderness of Paran. By the way, the wilderness of Paran is that place where the Jews wandered for 40 years. So David decides to go back there, and I guess he's like, well, I'm not thoroughly convinced that Saul's going to let me go. So let's talk about the wilderness of Paran, and now we're going to go to verse 2. Now, there's a town called Maon. Maon is in that general area of the wilderness of Paran. Maon is about 1 mile south of Carmel. And in Maon, there was a man there. He had a business in Maon, but he lived in Carmel. Now, Carmel is, the definition of Carmel is the garden spot, the vineyard land. And by the way, this was the same spot that Saul had erected a monument in his own honor. And that happened in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 12. But let's look at the area we're talking about. Hopefully you can all see that. You see that red dot up there? That red dot is Carmel. And you see just below Carmel is Maon. And just above it is Ziph. Now, the Philistines in Ziph had told Samuel that, had told Saul that David had been hiding in that area. So he left that area and he went down to the wilderness toward Maon, and he was hiding there. One more shot. Where was he hiding? This is kind of a small portion of that. You can see there are lots of rocks, and in those rocks are caves. And then back behind that are the fields. There's a lot more. They're green. Some of them are green. And that's where the sheep herders and the people who had goats and whatnot, that's where they took their animals to eat. Now, the name of that man that was in Maon was Nabal. And he had, as I said, his business in Carmel, and he was very rich. It's funny. At this time, they defined rich as owning sheep and goats. Nabal had 3,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep, and 1,000 goats. And he was actually starting to shear those 3,000 sheep. That's where the money came from, the wool, and he was shearing the sheep. Now his wife was named Abigail. Abigail means my father's joy. Abigail was a very intelligent woman, very beautiful, very smart. But Nabal, on the other hand, was mean, evil, drank, partied. He's hard-headed, like most men today, right? Okay, so David had heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep. And once you shear the sheep and you have a big party, you celebrate because you've just made a bundle of money. So they have a big feast once they're done with that. And David decides to send his young men, 10 of them, to Nabal. And to say to Nabal, we were up hiding in the hills, but while we were up hiding in the hills, we knew that your livestock was down there with your shepherds, and we were protecting them. Philistines. Nobody came and took any of them. Nobody harmed anybody. Me and my men, we were there. We were hiding out, but we decided to protect your business while we were there. Now, what do you think Nabal said to them? Well, before I tell you what he said to them, so basically what David said, and what you'll see here, what David says to them is, this man lives in prosperity, right? He says to his men, tell him, peace be to you, peace be to your house, and peace to all you have. That's blessed. That's basically, in a lot of words, a blessing. So David sends a blessing, good, to Nabal. Now, what do you think Nabal did to that good that was sent to him? What do you think he did with it? Nabal returned evil. He says, should I take my bread and my water and my meat that I've killed for my shearers and share it with you guys? Why should I do that? He didn't even care whether or not they had protected him and helped him make more money. He didn't care about that. So this is exactly what David's young men took back to David as Nabal's answer to his blessing. Obviously, David was not happy about that. Now, most of us, we remember David as this guy who is a young man. He slew Goliath. David was a military man, through and through, a trained killer. And that was his job. And when David got this message from this man who he had sent a blessing to, he was angry. You see him, how dare him? I sent my men. Look at it this way. Most of us guys, when we think we're hurt, what do? We get all, bro, we go, how dare I'm talking about that, especially if we're around other guys, right? Or if we're around our wife, you got the nerve of this guy, but we're lucky that our wives will say to us, calm down, calm down. You're not looking at this in the correct light. I'm like, let me make you a nice dinner. And let's pray over this. And by the morning, you'll have the answer from God. So, the young men, but David didn't do that, of course. He takes his sword. David's had this huge sword that he got from Goliath. And he tells all of his men, get your swords. We're going down and punish this guy. So they're starting off, but one of the young men goes to Abigail and he tells Abigail what's about to happen. That David and his 400 are coming and David is not happy. Your husband has insulted him and he has vowed to kill all of them. So David's on his way. Okay. So this is what, I think I covered this, but this is what Nabal said also to David. He says, who is David anyway? And who is the son of Jesse? As if he didn't know. But he's trying to, stoke himself up. Why should I do anything? Who is he? I didn't even know who that person is. So, Abigail, after hearing what was happening, she got with her servants, and she made up this huge caravan of food to take back to David. She takes back to him 200 loaves of bread. Remember, they're hungry, they're starving, and they're thirsty. 200 loaves of bread, 2 containers of wine, 5 sheep that have already been dressed and are ready to be cooked, roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 fig cakes. And she loaded that all up on the donkeys, and she sent that on ahead of her to David and those guys who were coming down towards to kill Nabal. And she didn't tell Nabal that what she had done, and she left. Meanwhile, David is now on his way, and boy, is he steaming. He is stoking himself up for what he's going to do. Yeah, this thing kind of jumps a little bit. He is stoking himself up. I can see David's like, surely in vain I protected those guys, I protected those cattle, and he insulted me like that. He says, when I get down there, it's going to be trouble. And then he makes an oath. And this is really surprising. David makes an oath to God that he is going to kill every one of them. It's a self-imprecation. An imprecation is a curse. It's to bring evil upon somebody. And it's David. He's doing that. And he meets Abigail on her donkey. And Abigail does something that he didn't expect. She gets off of her donkey. She puts her face to the ground. And she begs him, not me, Lord. Blame this on me, my Lord, that this inequity has been done to you. Blame it on me. And why is she doing that? She's a woman. She's there by herself. She's saying, it's my fault. Don't blame my husband. Blame me. Please listen to me. I know you're angry. Open your ears. Open your ears. Take your hand off your sword. Open your ears and hear what I have to say. I'm your maidservant. David stops. And then, I don't have all of it written here, but she goes on for about 8 verses extolling David's virtue. This would degrade you, David, to do something like this. This would not be something that you would want to be able to mention to your children later, that you became angry and you took your anger out in this fashion. God would not be happy with this. She goes on and on. She's really laying it on thick. And then in the end, she says, is this the young boy who took the sling and slew Goliath? Is this the kind of thing that he would do? I could see by the time she was finished, David was like this. He was so sad. He says to her, blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who has sent you this day to meet me. Blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed. And not just that, uttering curses to people, doing something that God certainly would not have been pleased with. So you see, although he was ready to return evil, he was hit with good. He was hit with good. And not just good, a lot of good. Let me ask the question. How many Abigails are here today? How many Abigails are here? Be honest. How many Abigails? I know you don't look at your husband. How many of you Abigails have had to do this? Yeah. And it's not just ladies, there are men too. And probably some children, some daughters who have had to say to their fathers, Dad. Wives, maybe even sons who've had to say to their father, Dad. So, after this, obviously David didn't attack. After this, she went back home, and there was her husband at his party, all drunk, having a good time with all of his boys, drinking and, whatever else they did during that time, the feast time. And she didn't say anything to him. She waited till the morning, hopefully when he would be sober. Right? And she told him in the morning, you and all of us and everything you have, you almost lost it because of what? Because your mean and your nasty ways. And what you did to the guy who's going to become the future king of Israel. And the scripture says that Nabal turned white as a sheet, probably, and his heart stopped. And later on, it goes so fast. Later on, a week later, 10 days later, he died. But that's not the end of the story. I'm going to stop it there. The end of the story is now David hears that Nabal has died, and he sends his servants again to Abigail. And probably David is like, this is a good woman. This is the kind of woman that I need to have. So he sends a marriage proposal to Abigail. And what does she do? He says, good. She returns good. She gets on her donkey with her 5 servants, and she goes to meet him. And they live happily ever after. No, but that's the end of our story. So we've talked about now returning good for evil. And we've talked about how the master tells us, no, you return good for evil, right? Don't return evil for evil. Return good for evil.